Okay, so delighted to have Kim Atkinson of the Scottish Sports Association with me today, and we're going to talk about all things Scottish sport. So, Kim, nice to
Thanks
have
so much.
you.
Lovely to see you.
Excellent. Now, we first got together, I was looking back at this, in February of last year. You kind of, on LinkedIn, you kind of messaged me and said, look, you explored the possibility of us kind of maybe doing some work together. And when I realised what it is that you did, I thought, actually, I really kind of can resonate with what you do, because sport is something I use a lot. I'm interested in it anyway, but also as a coach, and I use sporting analogy quite a lot. So I was really interested in kind of hearing more about what it is that you were doing. And I suppose really the purpose of today is really just to really walk through what actually you do, and you know some of the kind of things that the impact you make and the challenges that you face. So I've got a bunch of questions here. You happy?
Sounds great. Crack on.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, do you want to just quickly explain to people what the Scottish Sports Association, what the Scottish Sports Association actually is?
So we're the membership body for the governing bodies for different sports in Scotland. So our largest member is the Scottish FA, Scottish Rugby, Scottish Golf, Tennis Scotland. Our smallest members are governing bodies that have no staff at all. So it's the full spectrum, including Aero Modelers, Highland Games. So 50 or so national sports organisations. So their role is to try and help people have fun. That's the main and central part to sport, which we must never forget. But it's helping to try and get more people more active more often, because A, they'll get fun from it, but B, we know it's very good for the nation, which I'm sure we'll come to. So that's our members. We are a membership organisation. We provide them with some services and support. And we also are their collective and independent voice, which is a pretty unique and quirky thing to try and describe what we do. But a huge part of that is interacting with government and parliament. So we know that our members, their member clubs, and the people who participate and organise sport face barriers and challenges, some of which are created inadvertently through policy, or some which we know can be removed through governments working differently and creating new types of opportunities. So we work with the voice of our members in trying to navigate that, to try and make sure that it's easier for people to get involved in sport and people face fewer barriers and less bureaucracy. So it's a pretty exciting space.
It is. And yeah, so you've got two main audiences. You've got the membership that you then represent and look after in sport, and then you turn the other way to look at the government in terms of helping to influence policy and enable the sports themselves. So, and so what's, out of interest, how long established is the SSA?
1980s.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A long time.
So, and you've been
14 years.
14 years.
Still doesn't feel like that, I have to say. Still think I've got the best job in the world.
Yeah, you say that to me a lot. So,
Yeah,
and I know it because I can see it in your face all the time and the way you talk. So, I always would ask a business, and and this is the interesting thing is, you know, my market is business and business ownership. So the question I'm going to ask you just now is a businessy type question, which is, what's the problem that the SSA is actually trying to solve for members?
So I suppose part of it is that collective voice. So as I say, our members are the governing bodies for different sports in Scotland. Their members are sports clubs. So governing body membership is 13,000 sports clubs. So that's a third of the voluntary sector. So it's a huge, huge part of what supports communities. Their members are 900,000 sports club members. So that's not quite a fifth of the population, but it's a good chunk of that. And it's a sixth of all adults that volunteer. So in terms of, as a scale of enterprise, sport and sporting organisations are massive. Now that doesn't include football club memberships in terms of supporters, it doesn't include gym memberships, that is just 13,000 community sports clubs and their fifth of the population membership. So that's who the wider collective is that our members support. So what are we trying to solve? We're trying to help more people to be more active more often. So that's what our members do. They deliver events, they run national teams and events, they support club development, they support volunteer development, they support the governance and the rules of the game. So they are facilitating programmes through their club network, through their coaches, through their volunteers, through every community across Scotland. So, but we know they face barriers and challenges, so how can we help their lives to be easier. So we do a lot of peer-to-peer support. We do a cracking range of leaders' dinners. So our most recent leaders' dinner was with Anna Sarwar MSP, talking to him about what the Labour Party can do. We obviously are apolitical in how we work, so we will provide that opportunity to the other party leaders. But what can politics and policy do that helps to make that easier? And the other part that we do is that political engagement. So recognising that there are times that policy and politics plays an inadvertent part in sport, and sometimes quite a deliberate part in sport. So one of the examples of the things that people never assume was when there was a Barclay review of business rates a number of years ago, a business question that I know you like. The business rates, the review came out. There are implications for sport in how business rates sit. I am certainly not an expert in this, but neither are my members, and certainly neither are the clubs. But we know that there are sporting exemptions that did exist that were under challenge when the review of business rates came through. What do? The Cabinet Secretary for Finance, as it was at the time, Derek Mackay, phoned us and said, this might mean something for sport. We know you guys have been engaged. Tell me what we need to do. So we work with him, we work with his team, we negotiate and understand from our members what is the scale of that impact. And in coming to a collaborative solution, we know we've saved on an annual basis between £7 and £12 million a year for sport. Because this inadvertent policy consultation that then was going to have an impact on sport, we've been able to mitigate what that impact would be. So there's between £7 and £12 million a year more money being invested in developing sport than there is on whatever else that might have been otherwise. So it's a real quirk of our work. But again, as a sign of the relationships that we have across government and parliament, that they reached out to us and said, can you help us with this?
So it's interesting. So actually your job really is to kind of almost remove some of the hurdles and maybe open some of the doors that allows more people to participate in sport. And it was interesting. I was listening to that podcast just the other day. It was about kind of the amount of money spent in healthcare. And I think it was only 3% of healthcare is spent on preventative medicine, if you like.
Absolutely.
And I guess sport would be in that
Hugely.
In that kind of camp, right?
We spend a lot of time talking about prevention.
Right.
So our kind of mantra is helping people to live longer, healthier and happier lives. That's what our members do. Yes, it's through sport, but actually that's what that looks like. And I think if you look at, so we one of our areas of work we call Why Sport Matters, which is exactly that. So Why Sport Matters to me is I absolutely love it. I'm incredibly passionate about it, as I know you are too, watching it, playing it, anything. But actually we know that beyond the fun and the enjoyment that people get from being active, we know that actually it has a hugely important benefit to our nation. And if you look at the challenges our country faces, there's huge challenges across the NHS, as you say, in physical health. Well, we know that 2,500 people die every year simply because they're not active enough. 2,500 people. That's a horrible figure. Thinking, well, gosh, those lives could be saved if people were more active. And we know that health professionals talk about, if sport was a drug, it would be the miracle cure. Because actually, it can do so many things. We also know that the key indicator of life expectancy in Scotland is how physically active you are. More than anything else, how physically active you are will determine how long you live. And we know we've got vast disparities in life expectancy rates in Scotland, and indeed between men and women, and in more and less affluent areas. So from a physical health point of view, there's a huge amount that we can do, but physical health's probably the obvious one that occurs to people. But we also know that mental health is a real challenge in Scotland. I think about a quarter of the adult population currently are on antidepressants, and 1 in 4 people will have a mental health issue at some point in their lives. And we all have mental health.
Yeah.
But it's a great example of where we can all look after our own mental health by thinking about being a bit more active. We know that you're 30% happier if you take part in sport. We know it has a huge impact on cognitive decline, in saying actually, for older adults, it can keep the brain working a bit more efficiently a little bit longer. We know it helps with making friendships and loneliness. So the social impact part of sport is incredibly important as well. And if you then look at the other challenges that we're facing as society, Scotland has one of the lowest rates of girls' confidence in Europe. Well, we know that sport breeds confidence. It breeds teamwork. It breeds great communication skills. There are so many parts that it can bring in. And I think part of the challenge for sport is telling that story in a different way, because I think some people think sport and think, oh, that's elite.
Yeah.
We do very little in that elite space. Our members do, and that's really important, because the national pride that we all feel in any event, we get that, and that's really important, and we must not forget that. But some of the most incredible impacts that we can have, as you say, at that population level, at that preventative level, at that community level, are 13,000 sports clubs across Scotland, where there's intergenerational connections, there's community connections. People meet people that they wouldn't meet otherwise. And the opportunity to use sport as a vehicle in a different way is incredibly powerful. And I maybe just tell you a wee story, if that's helpful. Of this was a number of years ago, and I was chatting with some social work colleagues in Dundee. And they'd managed to pull together a group of young people who were at a high risk of a number of challenging things. So there was quite a high risk of offending. There were very few of them still in education, very few of them working. They were at significant risk of quite a number of different health issues. And, it was quite a concern as to what the social work team could do. But they had all the programmes. They knew all of the things that they could do to help. And they said, great. So they brought together this group of young people and said, right, here's all the things that we can do. We can help you. And they listed them all and they went through it and they were really excited. And what did they say? We just want to play football. They said, no, but we can help you with your education and you can find a job and we can look after your health and we just want to play football. And they said, okay. So they worked with some of the local clubs in the area and they developed a football programme. And the kids and the young people came along and they played football. And through engaging in football, they then said, I'd like to help out. Great, you can get involved in volunteering. They got some coaching badges. They got some jobs. They connected them with careers. They gave them sexual health advice because they wanted to play football. And that's the same across so many sports, if you look at different opportunities. And, so one of our members, is currently partnering with one of the veterans charities to help them get involved in bowls and looking at different community connections. So across all of our members, they're doing something innovative and different. But that's the beauty of it. That's what I would call the power of sport. And that's...
I was just going to say that you talk a lot about the power of sport. So that's. But you're right as well. Just thinking about it, when you start a good health habit like running or whatever, it then leads to other good habits or connections, doesn't it? So it absolutely has that nice knock-on effect that you might not think at the time when you access the sport, but brings all these other benefits.
And that's, I think, part of the opportunity is that we fulfil in that connect across government and parliament, so across the different networks. So yes, it's, the physical health, reduction in 1/3 of all causes of mortality if we're physically active. Population don't know this, but you could reduce your risk of all causes of mortality by 1/3 if you're more active. Is there a more powerful health message for people to hear?
And why is that? I mean, it seems obvious as you say it. Why is that not that message not getting out?
I think that's part of the opportunity of just having a different conversation. And there's some work being done with health agencies. Public Health Scotland are really engaged in this space, which is super. Partnering with a number of agencies, ourselves, Sport Scotland, and a number of other partners to say, right, how do we change some of the understanding that people have? What are the lessons we can learn from anti-smoking campaigns to say, that's helped people reduce the incidence of smoking? How do we learn from that by actually saying this is also really fun? Like, this is a fun thing. And as I say, it's the miracle cure. So, it's people understanding it's positive impact across 8 different kinds of cancer, let alone, it's got great work in terms of reducing dementia, in terms of, as I say, people just living longer, healthier and happier lives. Falls. So it's a great conversation. 2% of all falls result in a hip fracture. Hip fractures, particularly for older adults, can be particularly challenging. If we save that saves nearly £2 million a year in hospital bed days alone. That saves over £1 billion a year in hospital care costs. That's before we think about social care. But most fundamentally, the impact on somebody's life of not falling and being able to live that quality of life yourself and with your family for much longer. That's a conversation we need to be having. We know we're facing increasing challenges with an elderly population. Well, we need to be chatting with different partners to say, okay, we want to prevent issues with social care and we want people to have a higher quality of life. Being able to practice getting up and out of your chair, having that balance, having that stability, knowing that the likelihood of that you're going to fall is less. The empowering part of that for somebody's life, let alone healthcare, social care and cost, is something else. But we need to talk about the quality of people's lives first. So we know that if a number of years ago, Scotland had a national physical activity strategy called Let's Make Scotland More Active, groundbreaking in its time, world-leading policy. And it said if we were all 1% more active, we would save 150 lives a year, 157 to be precise, lives a year. And it would save £85 million to the economy.
1% more active?
If we were all 1% more active.
And how would you quantify that? What's 1% as in?
Each person is that little bit more active.
Just
fundamentally,
just go for a walk.
Fundamentally more for the people who are less active, because that's where the greatest benefits are. But I get asked about the £85 million to the economy and I'm sitting, that's great. But can we talk about the 157 lives a year that would be saved? Because that's the narrative that's more important in my view.
And so what about the challenges then facing sport in Scotland?
They're numerous, as is for any organisation. But at the same time, each challenge brings an opportunity. And that's a part of the work that we do with sport. So we know that clubs across Scotland are facing a challenging situation, the same as all businesses are, particularly post-COVID, particularly with the cost crisis. The challenges are there.
Yeah.
We know that because our members tell us that's our role, is listening to our members, and they listen to the clubs. So the clubs are telling governing bodies, and governing bodies are telling us that there are challenges in accessing facilities. They know there are people locally that want to play, but they don't actually have enough space to run the facilities, or they can't afford to get into the facilities. So if they're trying to get into facilities, the only place that most clubs can income generate, as it were, is through memberships. They don't want to be charging people an awful lot more. We don't want cost to be a barrier to people participating, but that is the reality of the challenge that clubs are facing. We also know that funding is a challenge in that sense as well, by the fact that they don't want to be increasing membership costs, but they also don't know how else they balance the books. So what else can they be doing to raise funds to try and make sure that cost isn't that barrier and that sport is accessible to everybody, particularly to those people who are furthest from being active, as it were. And we also know that the other thing, for any club or sporting activity or any community group to run, you need two things. You need somewhere to be, and you need the people to make it happen. And the people is also a challenge. We know that fewer people are volunteering post-COVID. And we know that's a huge problem in helping activities run, but we also know how important and powerful volunteering is, particularly for young people. And half of all young people that want to volunteer in sport. But if there aren't adults there to support them into volunteering, we know that actually this could be a problem in future, that people aren't in that cultural way of thinking, volunteering is just something that I do. So they're the big three things that clubs are telling governing bodies, and they're telling us. It's facilities, it's people predominantly through volunteering, and it's funding. So we work with our members to say, okay, so what does that look like? Now, there are many things that can be done, at parts of each pie to provide those solutions. But we've worked with our members to say, okay, what's the role of policy in this? What can we ask politicians, both within government and within Parliament, to do to say, right, how do we make this easier for people? And to be very clear, inequality strands every area of this work, knowing how challenging that is, but knowing that to really make a difference, we want everybody to be more active, and that genuinely is a passion across our members. So in terms of the facilities space, we're working with partners across the voluntary sector. So we know that, as I say, sports clubs are a third of the voluntary sector. But if you add that then to other community groups, culture, arts, heritage, the environment, uniformed organisations, that's 2/3 of the voluntary sector. And we know we're all saying community access to community facilities is one of the biggest problems facing the sector. And this is the sector that is the fabric of society. This is the clubs and groups that bring neighbourhoods and communities together.
So community access to community facilities. So actually just getting into actually use school sports fields and
school
gym
estate
halls.
is a favourite one, absolutely. So the school estate is a community facility. It's run on behalf of the community by the local authority or the leisure trust. But the feedback from community groups is that it's not as open and accessible as they'd like it to be. How and why that's the case is a very big question, and that's something we're working towards. But you hear different questions and different answers, and we have for many years, about what the issue is. So the work that we've done with members, and they've said this is now the tipping point of we need to crack this. We need to work out what's going on. So we work really closely with the government in relation to what's called their programme for government, which is effectively the government's strategic plan for the year in a business sense. So we've said to them, this is the priority. The government needs to help to move this agenda forward. Yes, a big part of that is a local government agenda, but we need partners to come together to say, what's the issue here? So again, part of that is in explaining to our members why we believe this is the route. So this is in the programme for government for this year with the work that we've done with Scottish Government. It's something that we're really proud of, and we're working in strong collaboration with government to make that happen. But what it means is instead for the last however many years, we've been working with the sports team in government, the Active Scotland Division, and the Sports Minister, Marie Todd, who are very, very passionate about moving this agenda forward, is they're trying to raise this with other departments, because it's not sport that runs community facilities. It's not sport that runs schools. It's not sport that runs, the wider council work that they do. Councils do that themselves, obviously. But actually, we need all to work together on this. So the statement in the programme for government means the First Minister, every Cabinet Secretary, and every Minister across the whole Scottish Government Cabinet and ministerial portfolios are now collectively responsible for saying, we need to look at community access to community facilities. So actually, something will happen, which is really exciting. And there's a working group that's been formed. We're part of that with a number of key partners. Really exciting, talking about, so what really is the problem and what really do we need to do about that? That, if we can be successful with that, which I'm absolutely confident we will be, changes what communities look like across Scotland. Because every community will hopefully be able to access their community facility for knitting, for culture. Hopefully sport will be a huge part of the indoor and outdoor portfolios of the school estate and wider community facilities. But it really can create a community hub in those areas.
It's quite interesting because you're making me think of a chat I had last year with a coach, a football coach who was running a team, and I think he said he had 145 people in these year groups that he had himself had created. He says, I can't, but I don't have any girls' teams. And the reason for that was, he says, there are no toilets. He says, it's easier to kind of say to a young lad, go and pop behind the tree, but and so I guess he doesn't have access, and therefore the girls in this instance are limited.
Absolutely, and that's a whole other part of an area of our work in leadership. So we do quite a lot of work in that leadership space, in diversifying leadership in sport. And again, it's something our members are really passionate about because they understand that that's the feedback that they're getting from their members. As I say, this is very much driven by our members knowing their clubs and their networks, and they tell us. And for our part, it's, so what's that collective opportunity? What does that mean that sports are saying collectively, where we can say, and that's the beauty of our role, because we work with government and with Parliament, we're accountable to our members. So our role is working with whoever and however in the best possible senses, and always being, as much of the friend as the critical, but saying this is what we need to do. But we're working with our members to say, here are the solutions. We're not coming with problems. We've got ideas about how agendas can move forward.
And how does that work then? Because to get anything moving when you have to influence so many people, it's a real skill, right? I guess that's what you guys do, but to phase back into that and navigate your way through all these different departments and the like, how do you do it?
How do we do it? We do it by understanding our members. That's the day job. Genuinely knowing what it is that sport is doing. And part of it's understanding how policy and politics works, and saying, how do we ensure that people understand sport and the contribution that sport and physical activity, they're on a spectrum, I use the phrases interchangeably, the impact that they can make. So when I first started in my job, I think we spent probably 90% of our time talking about why sport matters. So we spent 90% of the time saying, if your interest is education, then here's why sport aids educational attainment. If your area of interest is justice, then here's the contribution that sport makes to diversity activities for children and young people. Here's how it can help in any number of areas. Pick your area. We spent 90% of our time explaining that. We're now in a position where we spend 10% of our time talking about that. Right. And we spend 90% of the time saying to politicians across all parties, we are very lucky, we work really closely with them all. They are all very strong supporters of sport. But we're also in that place where you can then get collective agreement quite well, because we have the same conversation with each of the 5 parties. And therefore, whenever we're having that dialogue to move something forward, we know we've got that collective agreement that sports are going to move forward. So it's coming and being positive. We know there are challenges across society in all the number of areas. Of course there are. We're not saying things are easy, but we know that sport can help. We know that our members and their clubs stand ready to help and to do what they can. And we want to just have that positive conversation, but it's about solutions. It's about coming and saying, can you help me to do this? And we routinely do that with each of the parties, and they know what we do. That's the open, transparent way we work apolitically, to say, if you could do this, please, that will enable us to do this. Or we can't get an answer to this question, are you able to do that? So a recent bit of work we've worked through is with the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee in the Scottish Parliament. Very, very broad-ranging committee, as you can imagine, health, social care and sport. But they recently did an inquiry into women and girls' participation in sport, very much driven by conversations we'd had with them, where we were saying, this is a key agenda, exactly to your earlier point. We know that more women and girls should be more active for their own health, but we also know that can only be a good thing for everybody if people are more active and have the opportunities to reap the benefits of being active. We know it's quite a chunky area. There's a lot in that, in a lot of different areas. Therefore, actually, if a committee inquiry can do it, they have a resource in a different way and a different reach into communities and different networks to say, well, let's have part of that conversation. So we did a super piece of partnership work with the committee, with the committee members, the MSPs, and with the clerks, and saying, here are the types of areas that we'd love to hear more about that we think are really important. So the media being a really good one. So I think 4% of all media coverage in sport in Scotland is on women's sport. 4%. It's probably increased over the last few years, but a number of years ago, that's where that's at. So there's some serious questions to be asked of the media to say, well, actually, what's your role in this? What's your role as educators? To say, actually, You could reduce your risk of all causes of mortality by a third if you're more physically active. You know, are you aware as women that actually you are the key role model for a young girl participating in sport? It's the interest of the father, that the father's asking, how did that go? Did you enjoy that? Did you make some new friends? But it's the role modelling of the mother. If more mothers knew that, I think that would be very empowering for them to tell a different story. So the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee did a cracking report. They sat with a number of our members, with our chief execs and our leaders in our sports, saying, here's the good stuff, but here's what we need you to be asking. Here's how this report that you're working on can really add leverage. So we made sure that the committee was empowered as we felt we were able to support as part of that process to say, let's get into the real key questions. And a great report, which is really supported by government, about, right, how we're working together to move things forward, to say, right, we are all committed to getting more women and girls to be more active and removing the additional barriers that they face. What a cracking and exciting opportunity. So again, something we continue to work on with them and across all of the parties, but something our members are really, really passionate about.
So the report's then done, and then it's like that should drive action.
Yeah.
And are you getting the kind of action or the traction to the action?
Traction to the action. Yes, and I think that a big part of that is the collaboration of different ideas and different ways of working.
Yeah.
So these things take time without question, but there is that commitment to make it happen, and it's supported by our members already because they were driving a big part of that agenda. So it's where new partnerships and new ideas can come out to make a difference.
Yeah.
But it tests people thinking, it keeps different people accountable, it keeps an awareness of an agenda to think, actually, what's my role in this? Because that's a big part of it, is I see more people being more active as being actually everybody's responsibility. It's not just sport and physical activity. Actually, you know, where's the money going to be saved? It's going to be saved in health and in justice and in education. But it's this tiny little budget in sport here that's supposed to resource all of this. But actually, we know we can save £85 million of the economy if we're all 1% more active. So part of that is some of those conversations from a policy perspective about why increasing investment in sport in Scotland is actually an investment and not a cost. Because sport is often seen as a cost, particularly in local authorities who we know are facing incredibly challenging budgetary situations. But the routine, as we would see, silo working of, well, there's a department here, and this is the budget, and this is the budget. But sport works that way.
Yeah.
But actually, it's an easy budget to cut. But actually, you cut that today, your health budget tomorrow looks pretty challenging.
Yeah.
Your health budget in 10 years' time looks even worse. Because actually this was a decision you made here because it was easy, not necessarily because it was right. And I'm not saying there are any easy decisions at the moment in a budget context, but that's part of the conversation we need to be having.
And listening to you, it just seems obvious though. Why do people not get it? I mean, you get a more active population and the pressure lessens elsewhere in healthcare.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's an easy conversation, but there are conversations that are more straightforward in that than others. So I remember once giving evidence to the Finance Committee in the Scottish Parliament, and I was saying, you know, why more investment in sport in Scotland? And their question to me was, so do you think we need a new Forth Road Bridge? This was obviously a few years ago, and I'm saying, I'm not an engineer, I'm not the person to ask that question. I can tell you why I think investment in here is helpful, but I'm not telling you to cut that because that's not my area. Yeah. I think from a healthcare point of view, I understand that it is a difficult question. You know, we're facing some particular health challenges. That was pre-COVID, let alone post-COVID. We know we've got an elderly or an ageing population, so we know social care is going to be a challenge as well. To save money in that health spot and say, right, we're going to invest that in prevention, what are you doing? Are you closing a wing of a hospital? There's some pretty difficult conversations in there as to where you save money, but somewhere it is a different mechanism that says we firmly believe in prevention. So this was the Christie Commission report of many years ago now, which is still very well quoted and very strongly lauded as being the future of prevention and healthcare more broadly in Scotland. But we're not there. Everybody agrees with the principle, but it is quite a hard equation of maths. But if you think, you know, the sport budget in Scotland is 30 to 40 million pounds a year, 30 to 40 million pounds a year, and it could say 85 million pounds, 1% more active over a 5-year period. So part of it is that challenge of, and you know, we're not sitting there, I'm not an economist, I'm not sitting there saying, you know, you could save this money here, there, or the next thing. That's somebody for an awful lot smarter than me that's going to do that. But we know that the case is strong, and it is just trying to change some of that dialogue, but also knowing that some things are free. That's the opportunity. And that's where, in my view, you know, my phrase is always, when there's no money, policy's king. And policy is our back. That's what we do. So it's saying, okay, where can we change a narrative that actually will make a difference to people? And where does that not cost money? So a big part of that, one of the points that we made around volunteering. So we know that fewer people are volunteering in sport and generally in society. Volunteering is a reduction of 20% of all causes of mortality, 20% reduction in all causes of mortality. So volunteering in its own right is good for you. You're more likely to volunteer if you participate in sport. So, you know, everyone's a winner in that sense. But we know fewer people are doing it. We also know fewer people are volunteering in our more deprived communities. So again, there's not an equality in volunteering. Again, those more deprived communities have less community activity and there are less people volunteering. So again, it's hitting harder in that space. So again, that's the feedback from our members. We then work with our members to say, okay, what's the solution to that? What can we genuinely be talking about as a different kind of conversation? So at the moment, there's a huge conversation about a wellbeing economy in Scotland. What is a wellbeing economy? What does that mean? How does that drive the health and happiness of our nation that isn't just GDP? What is a wellbeing economy? So in conversation with our members, we've said, well, actually, a wellbeing economy is surely underpinned by wellbeing employers. To get a wellbeing economy, surely a wellbeing employer is quite important in that. So we've then said, okay, well, what do we think a wellbeing employer is? So a wellbeing employer for us is two things. A wellbeing employer is an employer that gives time for their staff to be active in the working week, paid and protected time. So we give our staff half an hour every week to be physically active for their own well-being, to go and do whatever they would like. It's also an employer that provides paid and protected time for their staff to volunteer in the working week. So we give our staff 8 days a year to volunteer to do whatever they would like. It's flexible, so it can be taken in hourly chunks or whatever. I'm sure a wellbeing employer means a huge amount in terms of, the living wage. It'll mean things in terms of poverty. It'll mean things in terms of sustainability, environmental. Absolutely. And we're really excited about it being a broader agenda. But for us, I think we're sitting in quite an exciting space in saying, okay, we know from sport and physical activity, we need more people to help to volunteer, to support community activity. And this, again, to be clear, is volunteering. It's not volunteering in sport. This is about volunteering. More people that volunteer can only be good for society. And if they volunteer in sport, great. They've got some, enough people will, it's, without question, but they'll volunteer anywhere, which will strengthen our communities and make our communities and people more resilient. But we know we're also sitting in a space where it's quite a challenging recruitment market, as businesses would tell us at the moment. They're looking for different ways to recruit staff members, to retain staff members, to increase staff motivation, to think about different opportunities for CPD and training, which is quite hard. We know that post-pandemic, people are saying, well, actually, my well-being is quite important to me. My mental health is quite important to me. How are you as an employer supporting that? Well, look, you can go and be active and you can volunteer in your time. So the pitch from our point of view is saying, where do most people spend most of their time? And the answer to that is at work. And therefore, also the people who are most time poor are often people in more deprived communities. So for there to be an equality in this space, if an employer can provide that time, then it's available to everybody. It's not just available to the more affluent areas or the less deprived communities, less deprived communities. So that's the conversation we're saying, okay, this is what we would do. We'd create a wellbeing employer model. So we've had, again, some really interesting conversations. Government are coming to us. A few different organisations have said, well, where's this come from? We're saying, look, we're not precious about it. It's just an idea of saying, actually, if people have time to volunteer, look at all the benefits that they'll get. We both volunteer. We love volunteering. You will always get more from volunteering than you get. Absolutely love it. Something we're incredibly passionate about. But actually, it has the unique power to change lives in a huge number of different ways. And actually, the benefit to the organisation that is releasing the employee, so the employer, the benefit to the individual in developing skills and networks and confidence, and the benefit to the place that they volunteer as well, huge. It's an absolute win-win-win in every sense. There's not necessarily money in that, but actually, we can do an awful lot more by working in a different way and just working a bit smarter. Well,
it was interesting because you've tipped into a question I was going to ask, which is what can business do to support the agenda? And obviously there's an example there by kind of almost giving access or time to employees. What else could they do?
I suppose there's a few different things. So there's thinking about, as you say, what being a good employer means to you, which I'm sure every employer does on a regular basis, but thinking actually volunteering and looking after your staff through being active is something that supports their well-being. But we also know that people who are physically active have 27% fewer sick days. So it's no bad thing for the business either. There is a win-win in all of this. From, I guess, an SSA and our members' point of view, it's thinking, what does that look like? What do we think that opportunity looks like? And I guess we're keen to work with a range of partners, and we work with a number of great partners already who are really passionate in this space about saying, this is about understanding the multiplying effect that supporting us and our members can have to help people live longer, healthier and happier lives. Who could disagree with that as an agenda? In doing a number of different things. So part of it from our point of view is people who share that passion that we have about being active around that preventative space, around recognising that we all want, our young people to be more confident. We all want people to, have better mental health. Whatever those areas would be, we know that those opportunities exist. So we're really keen to work with partners who are passionate about making a difference, who are passionate about doing things slightly differently. We agitate, we disrupt, that's part of what we do. Not because we're difficult, but because actually no change comes from doing the same thing every day. So we're keen to work in some different spaces. So a really good example of that area of work for us is 18 months or so ago, we established the Sports Funders Forum. So nothing exists like this in Scotland at the moment at all. But we know, again, from the unique position that we sit in, that we have members that are doing incredible things in communities across Scotland. We know there are funders saying, well, we've got funds and we want to support young people and mental health and physical health and loneliness. This is what our agenda. And we said, well, actually, we could connect that. But we also know there's a lot of businesses who've got CSR ambitions but don't know where to invest or how to invest. So we said, okay, could we provide that and pull that together? So this is our Sports Funders Forum. So we're looking for partners who want to share part of that, but who could also actually make this forum do even more through working with us. So the premise is the more that we can get people to collaborate. So one of the most recent sessions we had was focused on equality, something that is a huge national priority for so many people. And it was chaired and hosted by the Minister for Equalities, because she is incredibly passionate about this space. And she spoke phenomenally well, Emma Roddick, in saying, equalities is a passion and a problem that we are all aware of and we are all committed to helping to solve. And we as the Scottish Government know the incredibly important role that sport and physical activity can play in communities across Scotland in helping reduce inequality, in helping to reduce barriers, and in helping encourage and inspire more people to be active and to reap the health benefits. And all the funders said, wow, God, isn't that powerful? Yeah. So the funders came along and had a good chat and said, right, here are the funds that we have. Here's how we would like to support sports. And the sports then said, okay, here's some programs that we're running that we'd like to work with people. It's a bit of a sort of matchmaking. Where then hopefully there's more funding going into sport. And we've done similar recently on CSR, where a couple of partners have said, actually, there's a great alignment. So that's directly a new partnership of about how we solve a problem through businesses and sport coming together.
And when you say the funders, because I think you mentioned funders and also some businesses as well. So who would a funder be and who would a...
So there
are examples that you can name?
Yes.
Or,
So funders would be grants, trusts and foundations is who we think from that sense. So there would be the National Lottery that people would know. There's great work that Foundation Scotland do, Inspiring Scotland do. Equally, there's quite a number of other partners in that space that they would work with. They have funds that they are investing on behalf of other people to achieve agreed outcomes. So they are then saying, oh, that funder might work for you, or you might be a funder yourself and saying, right, okay, I want to make a connection there. On the other side, as you say, you've got businesses who would have CSR conversations and opportunities to say, right, I'm really passionate about young people. I'm looking for projects that will support young people. We know our members do a huge amount with young people. So where can we create those connects?
Yeah, so it's not just sports-related businesses that it could be any business, as you say.
Because I think, we've got members knowing they're doing great things with really strong ambition to be able to do more, but they're constrained by resource. We know there are businesses with great and absolutely phenomenal aspirations about helping communities in a different way, but nobody knows quite where to come together. So
how
we're
do you get the
providing
message out to businesses then?
And that's a work in progress at this stage, as we're understanding a little bit more about what CSR means today, what businesses are keen to work with and how they want to be part of that. So I think we hear from our members that their challenge in understanding CSR is finding the right person. You all know that when you have that conversation with somebody, it just clicks and you say, that's it. How do we find the right person? But we also know that businesses have those ambitions. But part of it for us is saying, who are the businesses that want to be part in that? Where are their networks? How do we reach out to say, by the way, guys, our members are doing this over here, who'd like to be part of them? And that's the bit of work that we're doing at the moment. And part of that is also explaining that they're not charities, but they're charitable. And this is a big challenge in our space. So a lot of funders and probably businesses say we support charities. In reality, they usually mean we support voluntary sector organisations or not-for-profit organisations. But they use the word charities. Very few sports are charities, but they are not-for-profit and they are part of the voluntary sector. So it means they don't report to Oscar, the charity regulator in Scotland, but they are charitable under the Charities Act. Our members, a lot of the Oscar guidelines would say it's easier for people. If you're regulated by Oscar, we know you need to meet certain standards around, let's take governance, for example. Well, our members, most of our members get some funding from Sport Scotland, the National Agency for Sport. Their governance audit's undertaken by KPMG. I'm quietly confident we're meeting the same required governance standards. So part of the work that we're trying to do is to explain, if you're not a charity, but actually you are still meeting these minimum requirements, this is still a great way of working in partnership. Because we know we're a nation that loves sport. You speak to anybody, I used to have a chair who was chair of the Scottish Sports Association, was the chairman of European Airport and Seaport Security. And he used to always say they would sit in these really tense and challenging negotiations with other countries about, security and where things would fit. And he said, when there was nothing else I could find, there was always commonality in sport. I could always find sport that would then, right, that's broken the ice, started the conversation. We're just a nation that loves sport. So our passion in this space with our Funders Forum is saying, where are those people who we know will want to invest in sport and for the sake of the outcomes that it can have on our communities, but just don't know how to get involved? We're really excited about that.
And in terms of the Funders Forum as well, obviously that's you kind of matching people up with businesses or funders with kind of sporting organisations, so there's a win there. But from an SSA point of view as well, should you be one of those kind of people receiving some additional funds to allow you to do more work? I guess that would be...
And for us, it's both, Alan, and that's a very fair point. We're a membership organisation. We live and breathe who our members are and how we help them every day. And very genuinely, that's the work across our team. But you're right. For us to be able to do more, that's a challenge for us. We are constrained by resource. We're a small organisation. The more resource that we have, the more we know we're able to challenge government, the more, in a constructive, obviously, way, but we also know that there are more opportunities that we could create. So, for example, water and sewerage rates. It's a favourite topic, you can imagine, of a lot of people, but this is a conversation we've had for a while. So we know that sports clubs across Scotland, where they own their own facilities, they pay water and sewerage rates. If you're a charity, you don't. This isn't fair or equitable as I see it, and I feel it's discriminating against sports clubs and sports organisations. That requires a policy change within government. We've started some of those conversations. There's quite a lot of work to do around that. We don't have the capacity at this stage to make that change. But when we know that sports are facing a challenge, sports clubs are facing a challenge of cost, to not have to pay that would be huge. So again, we can save them money in that space by doing things differently. But the other part is then saying, how do we work with people in a different space? So we've got some great partners that we work with, which is really exciting. And we really genuinely want to speak to more partners who share that ambition and that passion. But by saying, we know that employers and businesses are trying to do some different things, and we're quite excited about that. We know that women's empowerment and women's engagement is a big theme for a lot of businesses. We're doing some pretty exciting things in that space. We had a conversation around International Women's Day this year. I know we had a chat about that before. The Minister came along with 15 leaders across sport, and we had an incredibly empowering conversation about the good stuff. So we've talked previously about the barriers and the challenges. There's a necessary conversation in women's leadership, as everyone will say. But this was the most inspiring conversation I've been involved in 20 years in running sports organisations about what's the good stuff. What actually are the little things that helped us, and what can we as women do that will help others? And what does that mean as things move forward? So we're working with those women to say, actually, what can we do to change women's leadership through sport, but women's leadership generally? That's a really exciting space, but we know it's one that businesses are very strongly aligned to. Equality, diversity is a huge priority, and we know that. We run a programme called On Board for Sport. We know chats with pals all the time who are passionate about sports. My God, I'd love to join a sports board. How on earth do I do that? Well, we're sitting with sports boards saying, we're looking for volunteers. If you're table tennis and you're looking for a director that knows about table tennis, funnily enough, you're pretty well placed to find them. But if you're saying, I'm actually looking for somebody that is a financial director, or somebody that's just got a commercial background, or actually somebody that just brings a different perspective, where do we find those people? So our On Board for Sport programme has equality underpinned throughout, diversity as being a priority, because we all know that more diverse boards make better decisions. But also saying, where can we find independent directors and skills-based directors? But we also know, in hearing back from people who join sports boards, how empowering it is and what they get out of that. So one of our colleagues, my previous financial director, he's just stepped down. Mark was with us for 9 years and was absolutely phenomenal. But if you speak to Mark about what he got out of being on our board, so we turn over about £150,000 a year. Mark was an actuary. I think our accounts took him about 5 minutes, probably, in reality. But he talks about what he got out of being on our board. And he said, I'm a financial professional, that's what I do. But in my job, I work with financial people all the time. So we very much work to solutions in that same space. On the SSA board, which would be the same of every governing body board, people are looking to me for financial advice in a different way. Yes, we're making a collective decision, but they're asking me different questions and different thought processes that financial professionals wouldn't, because these people are experts in a wide range of other areas. So he said that's really enhanced my awareness of what I do and what the questions I might be asked through other professional networks. He also says that, sitting on a board, he now has a completely different perspective of what boards are looking for. He said, because I write papers for my board. He said, but now I'm sitting on a board, I've got a different sense of what they might want to read in my paper, the types of questions I might need to ask, how I might want to position that. So he said, all of these things make me better at my job.
So it's a
but I
huge-
also love sport. So this is a win for me.
It's a win all round.
Telling that story differently about, again, if businesses are keen to invest in supporting continuous professional development of their staff, but knowing that actually in an environment where resources are tight and we're saying, is the resource for CPD training courses, or actually is this not a really innovative and new way to do it? So there's a lot of opportunities around that, around employee engagement. It supports employee well-being and how we, again, can support different business engagement. A lot of our partners come to us and say, we'd like to do this, but actually, could you come and talk to our network about how you join a board? Because we know everybody would love to do that. So some of that B2B stuff actually works really nicely as well. So we're lucky to work with some great partners and we'd love to work with some more. So if people share those passions, or are just a little bit curious, we'd love to have that chat. We love what we do. I honestly have possibly the best job in the world, working with people who change lives every day through the power of sport, through the networks that they work with, phenomenal people doing phenomenal things with phenomenally small budgets. But what an exciting place to be in. And we'd love more people to get on that journey with us all.
And I, just before we wrap up, I know you love your job and I want to ask you kind of specifically why, but in terms of the impact that SSA have made as well, I mean, I know you've told me a story before about some legislation changes and the impact that had on certain sports. Do you want to tell that story? Because I found, I don't know if that's your best story. It was certainly a good one that I resonated with, but do you want to tell that?
I love that story. The nature of trying to explain what we do, I think, is quite often quite hard. And then, when you say to people you work in policy, people think, and you think, no. As you say, we'll come to that. But the opportunity to make a difference is something phenomenal. And people don't know how legislation works quite often, how politics works, how government works, how parliament works, why they're different. And that's some of the beauty of our position is being able to leverage everything to try and create a different solution and create a different future. And one of the best examples came through what's called the Custodial Sentences and Weapons Act, the Knife Crime Act to you and me. And this email popped into my inbox a good number of years ago. Called Knife Crime. And before I deleted it, assuming it was spam, thankfully I did read it, because it was genuinely an issue from some of our members saying, actually, this is going to have an impact. So when you say to people you work in sports policy, people think, well, you can't be that busy because there aren't that many of them. But you say, actually, a huge part of that is work. So we work across about 13 different departments of government. We're a very small team, but that's the nature of the impact that sport can have. So whether it's business rates or water and sewerage rates, as we've talked about before, volunteering, honours, on and on and on. All those areas that we know can have an impact on sport, but also where we want them to help us to have a positive impact on sport. So the email had come in, we read it and work through and realise, right, okay, an unintended consequence of policy, something that happens a lot. Policy is incredibly difficult to draft, let's be clear. It's not my job, thankfully, from that part, but you read it and you think hats off to the people that do it without question. But they can't know everything. So sometimes there are areas that cause challenge that people wouldn't be aware until a draft comes out, which is why there's consultation and opportunity for conversation. So our members at the time of archery, field archery and fencing came to us collectively and said, this is a problem. So what you and I would know as the Knife Crime Act basically says that under 16s, you cannot carry a knife. You cannot be given a knife, you can't be given a knife. Seems reasonable and fair. However, under the definition of a knife within the draft policy as it was at the time, it meant that the epis, foils and sabres used by fencing and arrows that are used in all forms of archery are knives. These are some of our smaller members. The way their sport develops is usually, come and try events for kids, taster sessions. You can imagine all sports do this. They say, great, Alan, come along, right, I'm going to show you how to do this. There you go. Well, at that point, you're breaking the law. So for these sports to be engaging and having the huge impact that they have on young people now, but let alone thinking, well, actually, for people at all stages of life, then think, oh, I've seen that. I played that when I was younger. I'd like to go back to that. This was, literally taking the feet from under these sports to say, where's your development going to come from? Because there's an unintended consequence of a definition of a knife. So we have our members that come to us and say, we know this is the impact, but how do you change knife crime legislation? And us saying, okay, we'll have that conversation. So again, always being driven by our members. We listen to them, we understand what the problems are, what the challenges are, what the nuance is. Because let's face it, we're not going to stop the Knife Crime Act for this reason, but we know what do we need to change. So again, solutions. What are the things that we can change that mean that the premise that underpins the Act isn't changed, because obviously that's incredibly important, but it will still allow those sports to be able to be active. We then have that conversation across all 5 parties in government. We then have that conversation, all 5 parties in Parliament. We then have that conversation with the government to say, here's the problem, here's why it's a problem, here's the impact that it'll have, and here's what we'd like you to do about it. And we have support. It was a huge piece of work one of my colleagues at the time, David, did leading that part, and it was phenomenal. But it was changing the floor of the chamber in Parliament by MSPs debating it and saying this is incredibly important to the future of sports in Scotland. So together we got that changed. And then just afterwards, actually, there was a major international championship for archery in Princes Street Gardens. And Kenny McCaskill, who was the Cabinet Secretary for Justice at the time, came. Come and see what you've saved. Come and see the enjoyment that people have participated. So, we're the small part in that makes it happen. But it's that connection. But it's explaining the impact.
Yeah.
And knowing the right people to engage to say, this is why we need you to make this change. But here is the change. So we've come up with the solution.
So one of the
already.
questions I would have asked is, so what if the SSA just didn't even exist? What would happen? And there's maybe I get an example.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's part of it is, as I say, the nature of we're disruptors. So we're independent of government. So we can ask the questions that we need to of government, of Parliament, or whatever that looks like. And that's an incredibly important role. Mm-hmm. Our governing bodies are reliant on funding that comes from government. Sometimes people feel it's quite hard to ask those questions. You put your head above the parapet. It's a difficult space to be in. But also, one of the key parts for me, I remember Michael Matheson, recently Cabinet Secretary for Health, just before I joined the SSA, we had a meeting. So chief execs across a number of sports met with Michael Matheson when he was an SNP MSP. And we pushed him really hard. And we said, as politicians, you don't talk about sport. You don't talk about why it's important. You don't talk about what you can do. All the parties put out their manifestos and you don't talk about sport. And this was back in, 2010 or so? Mm. And this is the push that they got. And it was true and it was right. They didn't. But what Michael said has stayed with me to this day. And he said, that's because you all say something different. So we wouldn't know what to do. So we don't do anything. Mm. So from that conversation, for each party, for each Scottish election, we work with our members and we write a manifesto for sport in Scotland. So you can't say, what would we do? We say, we've spoken to all our members. This is what they want you to do.
Great.
And this is what will make a difference. And that's our approach to then the programme for government submissions that we put in, to when we're talking about water and sewerage rates or whatever it is. This is what our members have said. So people only care about what we do and what we say because our members tell us, and that's absolutely the heart of everything we do. What I think is irrelevant. What they think is very, very relevant. So that's the collective power of that voice, because otherwise people do things because they don't know where to engage. They don't know where to have those conversations. But there isn't that collective voice to say, actually, this is really important. So in working as a collective, we've been able to convince politicians over many years of why sport's important, why they want to get behind that, to then, there's been a cut in the sports budget this year. That's the first cut in the sports budget materially for many years. If you look at cuts in most other areas of government, that hasn't happened. But sorry, that's happened. They've had some serious cuts. Right. And we're in an incredibly challenging financial environment. But actually, the prioritisation of sport is understood. Yes, we need more investment. Yes, we need to understand why investment, as I say, in sport is an investment and not a cost. But we are in a strong position. But that strong position is hard-earned. But it's also hard-earned by our members saying, we want to play our part. We know that when there are challenges around equalities or around poverty, what can we do to help? Yeah. Because we know that across communities across Scotland, they are a local network. If you're a young person, quite often the person you may confide with if you're having challenges is a coach. We know the incredibly important role that clubs play as anchor organisations, that volunteers and coaches play as that person that's trusted. We know in whatever area of society you're looking at how incredibly important a role sport plays. And I think we understand that as a nation more than we have before. We've played a small part in that. We're not the only ones that have done it. But as that only independent and collective voice for sports, we are very lucky to be trusted by our members to play that important role, where that's why I get out of bed every morning, because we have this little quirk that we know how to do things that other people just don't. But for the right reasons, we can make that change for sport, and that's exciting for me.
And I guess finally then, you said a couple of times already that you got the best job in the world. Why do you love this job?
Because I work every day with people who do great things to help people do great things. And that in its own sense has got to be the best job in the world. I'm incredibly passionate about sport, any part of sport, whether that's participating, coaching, volunteering, spectating, everything. I absolutely love it. Officiating. Never forget the officials. Incredibly important in what they do. I just love what I do. But our members work really hard with really limited resources. It's the nature of voluntary sector activity. Every penny literally is squeezed to say, well, how do we innovate? How do we something that's different? What does that look like? How do we create different partnerships that mean that more people have an opportunity to be more active? So every day I hear from members about not just good things that they're doing, but innovative and incredibly powerful things that change lives. So whether it's table tennis, talking about some work that they're doing in care homes to try and help, because some of the least people active in society are in care homes. There are table tennis programs in care homes. They're putting in table tennis tables because actually that's a really accessible way for people to get active. I mentioned earlier, bowls are doing some work with veterans. There are 815 bowls clubs across Scotland in every single community. They are working with elderly populations to just come and have a cup of tea. You don't have to bowl. Oh, you quite fancy bowling now? Oh, that's great. That's fabulous. Got a great email just yesterday from Tennis Scotland talking about actually some of the effect that Andy Murray, Jamie Murray and Judy Murray have had about highest levels of participation in tennis for many years, the increased number of courts that are available, the work that they're doing in that space. Every single day you get one of those emails that you go, yes.
Yeah.
And how many jobs give you that? About something you genuinely are absolutely passionate about. They do great things. Why wouldn't you want, the idealist in me, why wouldn't you want people to live longer, healthier and happier lives? That's what my members and their members and the 90,000 coaches, the 200 volunteers and the 900,000 sports club members get every single day because of the great people that I get to work with.
Spot on. Well done.
Thanks.